there's a cornfield about 2 hours north of where I'm sitting right now. Most of the year, it looks like every other cornfield in Iowa, flat, quiet, wind, Iowa. But if you walk in from the gravel road about a half a mile, you'll find a small stainless steel marker shaped like a guitar, and next to the road where you started, a giant pair of black horn-rimmed glasses. People come from all over the world to stand in that spot in February in an Iowa wind chill that'll peel the skin off your face. It's so cold. They come here because of what fell out of the sky there in the early morning of February 3rd, 1959. And they come because of a coin flip. One coin, two men, heads you fly, tails you ride the bus. This is the Sideman Show. I'm Bear Clair, and I've lived in Iowa most of my life. Tonight, the night the music died, the version you know, the parts you don't, and the mystery that got a body pulled out of the ground 48 years later. Hang on. To understand that night, you have to understand how bad things already were. The Winter Dance Party, January 1959, Buddy Holly was 22 years old, already a legend, headlining a package tour with Ritchie Valens, who was 17, and the Big Bopper, Dion and the Belmonts, 24 shows in 24 days, zigzagging around the upper Midwest in the dead of winter. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced the winter in Iowa or in the Midwest, but they're harsh. And whoever routed that tour should have been arrested. The stops made no geographic sense, hundreds of miles between shows, back and forth, crisscrossing Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, in old buses with heaters that kept dying. I want you to picture this. Rock and roll stars, the biggest names in American music, huddled in the back of a frozen bus, burning newspapers in the aisle to stay warm. That's true. Buddy Holly's drummer, a kid named Carl Bunch, got frostbite on his feet. So bad they had to carry him off the bus and put him in a hospital. Read that again here. The drummer was hospitalized by the tour. So when they rolled into Clear Lake, Iowa on February 2nd for a last-minute show at the Surf Ballroom, Buddy Holly was done. He hadn't slept properly in days. He was out of clean clothes, and he made a decision that musicians have made 1,000 times since. Forget the bus, I'm chartering a plane. It was a little four-seater out of Mason City. Fly ahead to the next stop, get some sleep, do some laundry. That's it. That's the reason. The most famous flight in music history was about laundry and getting a good night's sleep. The plane held 3 passengers. Buddy took one seat. The other 2 were never supposed to be who they were. You see, seat 2 belonged to Waylon Jennings. Yes, that Waylon Jennings. 21 years old, playing bass in Buddy's band, but the Big Bopper had the flu. He was a big man, miserable, folded into a frozen bus seat, had been there, it sucks. He asked Waylon for his spot on the plane. Waylon said, "Take it." And then Buddy, teasing his bass player, said, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up." And Waylon shot back the line that he would carry like a stone for the rest of his life. He said, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." Seat 3 belonged to Buddy's guitarist, Tommy Alsop. Ritchie Valens, 17 years old, had never been in a winter like this before, and he was sick of that bus. He kept asking Tommy for the seat. Tommy kept saying no. Finally, backstage at the Surf, Tommy pulled out a coin. He said, "Okay, heads, Ritchie flies, tails, Tommy flies." Well, it was heads. Ritchie Valens reportedly said, "That's the first time I've ever won anything in my life." And one more name, Dion, of Dion and the Belmonts. He was offered a seat too. The cost was $36, and Dion couldn't do it because $36 was the exact rent his parents used to argue about every month back in the Bronx. He couldn't bring himself to spend a month's rent on one flight. So $36, a coin flip, case of the flu, that's all that stood between living and dying that night. The show at the surf ends, and by all accounts, it was a great night. Kids had packed the floor, Buddy was playing like Buddy and driving the crowd crazy. Then, before 1 a.m., a car carries Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper to the Mason City Airport. The pilot is Roger Peterson, 21 years old, a good young pilot by reputation, but not certified to fly by instruments alone. And boy, did that ever matter, because the weather that night was deteriorating so fast. Light snow, low ceiling, a black Iowa night over black Iowa farmland. There was no horizon, no lights, no visual reference at all, if you can imagine. The Beechcraft Bonanza lifts off just before 1 a.m. and it banks to the northwest, and within minutes, it's gone from the sky. No mayday, no radio call, nothing. The wreckage wasn't found until the next morning, when the owner of the flight service traced the route by air. The plane, it had hit in the frozen ground at full speed in Albert Jules' Cornfield, about 5 miles out, and then it skidded into a fence line. Buddy Holly was 22, Ritchie Valens was 17, the Big Bopper, J.P. Richardson, was 28, the pilot just 21 years old. The most likely cause, a young pilot in instrument conditions he wasn't rated for, losing the horizon, in the dark, possibly misreading an unfamiliar attitude gyro, climbing when he thought he was level, descending when he thought he was climbing. In aviation, they have a name for it. It's called spatial disorientation. That night, the sky over Iowa in the winter swallowed them whole. Now, if the story ended there, it would just be a tragedy, but this is where it becomes a police file. That spring, when the snow melted, Albert Jewell was working his field near the crash site, and he found a gun, a pistol that had belonged to Buddy Holly. Buddy carried it on tour, and a lot of acts did that back then because they were hauling cash payouts town to town. And believe it or not, there was crime even back then. And the whispers started immediately. Was the gun fired? Did a shot go off in that cramped little cabin of the airplane? Is that why a perfectly good airplane dove into a field minutes after takeoff? And there was a second thread to this. The Big Bopper's body was found thrown well clear of the wreck, farther than the others. For decades, people asked the ugly question, did he survive the impact? Did he try to crawl for help across the frozen field and then die alone in the snow? For almost 50 years, those questions just sat there, unanswered, festering the way questions do, until 2007, when the Big Bopper's own son, Jay Richardson, did something almost nobody had the stomach for. He had his father exhumed. One of the most famous forensic anthropologists in America, Dr. Bill Bass, founder of the legendary Body Farm, examined the remains head to toe, x-rays, full analysis. The findings: no bullet, no gunshot wound, no evidence of foul play of any kind, and the fractures told the final truth: massive, instantaneous, unsurvivable trauma. The Big Bopper did not crawl anywhere. He, like everyone on that plane, died in the instant of the impact. He never suffered. The gun was just a gun, thrown from a disintegrating aircraft like everything else on board. 48 years of dark rumors, closed by science and by a son who needed to know. That's the part of this story almost nobody ever tells, and it's a part that lets the dead finally rest. The surf ballroom is still there. It's still open. Almost unchanged, actually. Same stage, same booth. They say the phone Buddy used for his last call home is still on the wall. And every February, on the anniversary, they hold the winter dance party all over again. Musicians and fans from around the world, packing a ballroom in a town of 7,000 people. in the coldest week of Iowa winter to finish the tour those boys never got to finish. 12 years later, a kid named Don McLean wrote 8.5 minutes about that night and gave it the name it's carried ever since, The Day the Music Died. But here's the thing, and I say this as a man who's spent his whole life making music in this state. I've lived a few other places, but the majority of my life has been in Iowa. The music did not die in that field. Here's why. Waylon Jennings walked off that frozen bus and he became an outlaw legend. He carried that last joke with Buddy his entire life. I know that for a fact. Tommy Allsup lived 60 more years and opened a club called, ironically, Heads Up. Dion's $36 of rent money bought him 5 more decades of hits. And every artist who's ever multi-tracked a record owes something to Buddy Holly, who was pushing studio experimentation further than almost anyone in 1959 at 22 years old. The sad thing for me and others is we never got to hear what he could have done with 8 tracks. That might be the biggest loss of all. The music didn't die. Iowa's been keeping it alive every February for 67 years. I'm Bear Clair, and this has been the Sideman Show. And if you'd like to get my free Luffs sheet, you can do that. So before we do that, if you wouldn't mind, hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up. If you make music, you can grab my free Luffs cheat sheet in the description below. 45 years of mastering. It's boiled down to the numbers that make your hit records right. And just on another note, hug your bandmates. Take the bus sometimes, and I'll see you next time on the Sideman Show.